Hey everyone, Tom Seymour here from VHS Massacre. I figured I'd do a little show. There's going to be a number of things I go over. This video essentially we'll be talking about independent film production, various things. I'm going to be talking about the original Terrifier today, and also a brand new film I have out called American Expendables. And then we're going to actually look back at another older film I did called Len and Betty. So, just to start up the bat real quick before we get into the Terrifier, which we're really going to be able to looking more at the production elements of that. I don't really do reviews because there are other people online who do a much better job of that. But I've been a filmmaker for about 25 years and making features, so I'm more interested in that, the production side of it. So, but American Expendables is one of the coolest announcements I have is that American Expendables will premiere November 12th on Tubi. This was a big deal for me and Tim and W. Roshan and the rest of the crew because Tubi I've come to feel is sort of where the cool kids are nowadays. Decades ago, Netflix was kind of the cool place to be. I don't think that's true anymore. And for a while, I felt like streaming sites like Mubi was in particular like an interesting art house one. I still think that's pretty cool. But places like Shudder and Tubi and some of the sites that will play more interesting stuff, to some degree uncensored, although people are saying that Tubi is having to censor certain films because of advertising to some degree, which is a bummer. But that is where I watched Terrifier, actually. So Terrifier is on Tubi for free right now, the original. It is, man, when I first started watching, I was like, man, this is brutal. Some of the horror makeup effects were very effective, and mutilations and stuff like that. It's like, oh god, I don't know if I'm like getting too old for this stuff. I'm like aging out of it, but I was like, man, this stuff is really well done, and but pretty heavy stuff. But as the film, when I started to get a feel for the film, I was like, okay, I can do this. Excellent horror film. Independently made. The original Terrifier 2016, not the short film but the feature, had a $35,000 to $55,000 budget. That is almost a miracle for what we're seeing on screen. The lighting is beautiful. It's the director I've never met. I have two points of connection to this film personally. Joe Marshall, I had dinner with my friend Chris Ferry before Terrifier came out. He was telling us all about it, so I've met him before. And then the female lead, Catherine Corcoran, I met twice. Once, technically I was in Return to Nukem High Volume 2. I was a teacher in a scene running around, but I don't think it made it into the film. I watched the film. I didn't see my cameo, but she played the lead in Return to Nukem High Volume 2. So I met her at the premiere there once, and then she came to my premiere of the original VHS Massacre through Troma Films. So met her very briefly. So it's a weird thing. Not that I was involved in the Terrifier, but there's these two, it's a small world, so it's very interesting. But I finally got around to watching the film. Terrifier 3 came out, destroyed the box office. I was like, let me watch the original. And I was just delighted by how independent it truly was. One of the things that is the lighting was absolutely exceptional. The costume design, the makeup effects, exceptional for $35,000 to $55,000. I could not believe it. And the director, Damien Leone, even more than the directing, the editing, I was surprised he cut this thing. And great job, man. This thing's cut really tight. I assume I didn't see anything about for post-production, additional post-production. So it means this guy Damien color graded everything. This movie's fucking beautiful. It really, it's really exceptional. I can see why this thing did so well. And the bizarre thing about it is that, if you look into other sort of, this would be called a no budget film. That's not what they would call it, because it's under like $250,000, like way under. But films like this would be comparable, like El Mariachi or like Clerks. I did one called Everything Moves Alone, though no one saw it. It was a 16 millimeter feature. But let's say, for instance, Clerks, they spent something like adjusted for inflation, they spent about $250,000 in post-production fixing that thing, color grading it, blowing it up. They did the same thing with El Mariachi. I think even Slacker, Linkletter's Slacker, when they made a print, they had to dump some money into that. So the modern version of that is Terrifier, 2016 Terrifier, where except it doesn't look like a studio dumped a bunch of money into color grading. It looks like this guy, Damien Leone, did it all himself, or at least that's what I'm seeing in the credits. If could be wrong, let me know if I'm wrong. But if that's the case, really, really amazing stuff. Never met the guy, don't know anything about him, but I can just look at it. Terrifier is a film and an independent production, and I think it's pretty cool. I like that it's got this trauma connection with some of the performers in it. And at least one of the producers was a very cool dude. So, yeah, I mean, you're looking at this film now. This would be modern template, guys and girls. Like, this would be the one to use. I'm not saying go out and make a clown horror film. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying this is almost pitch perfect. You pick something, it's an exploitation film. So you're picking something very specific that somehow is in the zeitgeist of now. The clown thing works. I mean, clowns aren't new, right? They've been, killer clowns from outer space. I mean, you go back to even Freaks, right? 20s and 30s cinema, right? But that being said, like, there's something about it, right? Terrifying, right? So I know an independent filmmaker did one recently called A Clown in the Woods. It's, great title, but just from looking from it from the perspective of all the money went on screen. Okay, they hired a kick-ass horror, or whoever did the horror makeup effects. If I can bring it up quick, I will. Makeup effects, Michelle Gianchetti and Alyssa Vecchio. So a makeup department. Let's see, special effects. Okay. Oh, special effects. Phil Falcone, who was also a producer, and then Damien Leone, who was also the director. Okay, so again, this more and more feels like a genuine independent production. Like it's not, they didn't secretly dump all this money into it. You had a lot of people doing dual and triple roles, so pretty incredible stuff. As a production, great. It's a great template. $35K, I understand. Like, who has $35,000? It's very hard. But from what I understand, they did do Indiegogo, and they did raise the money. So they had a really good pitch. They had some success with their short films. I think All Hallows Eve was that compilation thing. So they had done something smaller, and then did an Indiegogo to do a standalone film. That had success, and they managed to get the budget together. So let's say it was 35 to 55. Let's say it was in the middle, like $45,000 budget. So they raised that money, and they made this money. And then the second one, I know some of the producers changed over, was much a bigger production, and I can't speak for the second and third one. Those seem to be separate from the first. But that being said, this thing is super rare. even talking to that producer Joe Marshall, he understood like they caught this fire. Like it was so rare to have such a small movie blow up in such a big way. I mean, Terrifier 3, for instance, beat out Joker, right, at the box office last week. So pretty big deal. So one of the things that you can do is really try to dissect this film. Excellent. It's as someone who edits myself, directs and edits, if you can shoot and edit, you can, in some ways, you can become unstoppable. If you refine your craft and you get really good at it, you can shoot and edit, you can make your own film with just a couple other people. So that's something, if you really have a heart for it, learn your lenses, learn your cameras, learn to edit, and learn to color grade, learn to work with audio. If you can master that stuff, you really can do something like this. This movie, I suspect, if everyone did singular jobs and were hired all separate, this would be more like a $250,000 film. But clearly the director is doing 3 different things: horror makeup, editing, directing. You have a producer who's doing... I saw a producer doing stunt driving as well as producing. And so this is the kind of stuff we used to do. I think the closest example I could put to something I did was Exorcism of Fleete Marish, we had really great horror makeup effects of this faceless leper, and that was a very low budget film. You had people doing 3 or 4 different jobs at once, but we made it work. That film's for free, streaming on the Horror Channel, and I think it's on Tubi as well. So Tubi is great, by the way. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. But consider looking at the Terrifier as a perfect modern template. A lot of people, they say especially I work for college, and a lot of examples of successful independent films are so old at this point. They bring up, not that I don't, I'm just saying this is a good new one, but if they bring up like something like Blair Witch Project, right? It's like that was a very specific thing that happened then, but what do we have now to draw inspiration from in regard to building a production that, let's say, a middle-class person, I don't know any of these people, but this kind of thing is within grasp. If you have a successful Indiegogo raising $30,000, it's possible. So like a normal middle-class person could possibly do this. I think that's what I advocate for the most. Because I think we need more of that. I think we need more, middle-class folks making independent films. Again, I don't know any of these people in the production, but that's my instinct anyway. So that's that. But if you want to see the documentary, to switch back to American Expendables, American Expendables is a film about I don't know if you're watching this and you don't know who I am. So I directed the VHS Massacre films, which were about the video store era. There's 2 of those features. This one is about direct-to-video action stars, specifically Cynthia Rothrock and Billy Blanks, you see here. And basically it looks at the martial arts craze in the 80s and 90s in the video store era, and just a look at some sort of forgotten heroes that are worth looking back upon. And it looks at a lot of the films from the North American Pictures catalog. And in the North American Pictures catalog, you had everything from like Basket Case 2 to Maniac Cop. You had some Dolph Lundgren films, some Christopher Walken films. But then it really kind of hones into the sort of martial arts craze. That back when you had sort of McDojos on every corner, and there was more mystique about martial arts, and there was less. It was pre-internet, so there was less information about how films were made. Just kind of a really warm look back on that. Anyway, if you want to watch it now, I think it's like $2 on Prime. And it also released on Fandango at Home, which is a really cool thing. So you can think of it in terms of American Expendables was made for basically nothing, because it was a documentary, and I was able to do it in my spare time. This is a decent example of how to make a feature-length documentary and release it to the public and get on some pretty cool streaming sites. But Terrifier is just an amazing example of an independent film, low budget or no budget, actually, that was able to essentially make it, on such a huge level with Terrifier 3. So just really interesting stuff. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So I'm working on a new documentary now called Video Dreams. It's a bit autobiographical, but it does talk about a no-budget independent film called London Betty that actually was in all the Blockbuster videos back in the day, starting in 2010 and pretty much until the end of Blockbuster in 2013. I don't know if you remember, but that new release wall, the new release wall on Blockbuster had films that were like 3 years old on them. So London Betty was one of the last films that stayed on the new release wall up until pretty much the store went under. I mean, there's one last one in Bend, Oregon that still exists. If you want to watch VHS Massacre 2 for free on Tubi, it actually talks about the last Blockbuster. Anyway, so London Betty was a comedy adventure about these small town thieves. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the film as a production. And this may be used in the documentary, maybe not. If you know anything about the films I did, like a lot of the podcasting, some typically will work its way into the films. And that's kind of how I've been able to process and digest stuff to work on larger projects. But let me hop over to here. So London Betty was a rough shoot. It was about a $14,000 budget, and it was and it was like a 14-day shoot, 2 weeks shoot. We essentially had to pull doubles, so we'd shoot all day outside, then come inside for interiors at night. One day in particular was when we shot the big fight scene in the back of the carnival where we breathed in fireworks all day, and then we had to shoot in the basement that night. So that's when I just remember just having a huge headache. We inhaled all this smoke from the fireworks, and we were in the basement. I think the DP had gone home because we had already worked a full day, and so people operating the camera, I think we would just lock down the camera. Sometimes we'd have the boom operator would do double duty, or we'd call in someone's friend to just babysit the camera. This is not something we didn't want to shoot that way, but when the production keeps going on and on and on, and you need to keep shooting because you haven't got the coverage you needed that day, a lot of the stuff we did, people are either paid next to nothing or they're volunteering, and they have lives, so sometimes they just have to go home. But we needed to keep shooting because we needed to finish the film, and it was just simple math. If we didn't have enough footage, we couldn't make a feature, So I remember being in that basement, dizzy from the fumes, and it was the most elaborate shoot. We had some momentum from the last feature film we did. We did a film called Land of College Prophets that was sort of like a backyard superhero film. And so when we rolled into London Betty, we had this sort of high confidence. And so that energy kind of carried us through the 14-day shoot. And also that allowed having it's. I'm going to go back to the Terrifier for a second. I think All Hallows Eve is like the thing. There was a Terrifier short in that, and I would imagine having that film in the market gave that director some street cred. Well, for us back in 2005, Land of College Prophets was on all the shelves in all Hollywood videos, in all movie galleries, though not on the shelf at Blockbuster. And that did give us some street cred. It was a big deal to be a direct-to-video back in the day. It took us years to get to that point, but it was a big deal for us. But that did allow us to have that under our belt. So the next one, we wanted to try to get some character actors in it. So we got Clint Howard to narrate, and Daniel von Bargen, who was in Seinfeld. He played Mr. Kruger, Costanza's boss in Seinfeld, and he was also in Malcolm in the Middle and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou. We were able to hire both of those people, and so you might say, well, how did you do that? Well, there is this like mystique that you have to go to parties and meet people and do all this socializing, and that's not necessarily true. You can hire, if you have somewhat of a record, you can try to hire character actors by simply going through their agents. At least when I did it, you could sign up for an IMDb Pro account that would usually give you some decent agents information. All this stuff is not necessarily 100% accurate. You'd make a list of character actors, not Tom Cruise, not Brad Pitt. You know, you're not going to get Denzel, right? So, but what you can do is make a list of character actors that you've noticed that you thought were really cool. So I had a whole list of really cool actors, like, you know, Amy Sedaris or Billy Connolly, Wallace Shawn. You know, there was Keith David was another one that I would love to have worked with. And so we made a list and we got agent information. So we call up, and to be honest, like a lot of people, the agents were really rude because their job is to field nonsense. But the thing is, we did have our ducks in a row. We registered that film with SAG. We signed an ultra low budget agreement. It was called at the time. It might be called something different now. We had all the money in place in an account, and we had the script in place. We knew which day. We had the day scheduled, you know, months and months ahead of time. And so at that point, when you're approaching the agent, you're saying, you know, this is the stuff you're saying. We're registered with SAG. We have the money in the place. We can pay this amount, a couple grand. And for character actors, you know, that's going to be it. They're either going to want it or not. And then you submit the script, and either they take it or they don't. So what happened was, tried a dozen people, got through to Clint Howard's agent, eventually passed the script on to Clint Howard. He was like, yeah, I'll do it. Same thing with Daniel von Bargen's agent. It was like, yeah, I'll do it. And that's that. You know, it's not about it's not really about schmoozing. It's just, you know, it's work. So act like an employer, you know? So that's the best thing I can say about that. Be prepared to be treated rudely by agents. But keep going until you find an agent that will field your call, submit your materials, then it's up to the performer. Most will say no. Some will take a risk and say yes. That's how you do it. You can do it. Anyone can do it. If you can't raise $35,000 like Terrifier, maybe you could raise 10. I've made Exorcism of Fleete Marish. Watch it now if you want. Maybe you think it sucks. Technically, that was $6,000 we had in cash. John Gorman, that was a few producers chipped in $1,000 here and there, including Tim Kulig. John Gorman funded a lot of it, and then I think it crept up to maybe $7,000 in cash by the end. So that's a $7,000 film. I think it's pretty cool for what it is. Exorcism in the Woods, an old sheriff and his best friend have to perform an exorcism on their mutual friend. I thought it was pretty cool. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say today. Besides that, if you're not into horror, you can do sci-fi. That's a little harder with no budget. People are pickier. And then drama Drama's really rough. If your heart's in it, you should do it. You should do what you want. But just as a product, genre films are easier to sell because they have built-in audiences, and it's always like I say, bad horror is almost as good as good horror. The way it works, if you do not have connections in the industry, is that there are distribution companies that will take no-budget films. My favorite company right now is MVD. MVD will take low-budget films. You can submit to them. There are other companies, SRS, Troma, Full Moon, I think, still does potentially. And so they are out there, and they are still doing it, putting out films. Typically, you need a distributor as a middle person to then go to these big streaming formats. So with me, VHS Massacre 1 got on like Peacock TV, which is NBC Universal. It got on like Mubi, it got on Prime, Tubi, basically everything except like HBO or Netflix or something like that, or Disney Plus, right? So it got around to a lot of the major ones, the ones that are accessible for independent filmmakers. And so it can be done. It just, you're not typically going to be able to do it as an individual filmmaker. You're going to have to go to a distribution company, which is then going to bundle your film with 200 others and then license them as a lot to a big company. So that's typically why you have to do it that way. That's how I do it. The only films I publish on YouTube are like really older films that have played in some limited theaters for film festivals or some screens on New York, that have gone through physical media, streaming, and I've gotten the rights back. Those are the only ones that would end up on YouTube. I would not start on YouTube. YouTube is awesome, but at least right now I don't think it's a good place where your film will premiere. Like technically, you can get American Expendables as a rental on YouTube. I don't think that's a bad idea. But typically, if you're going to be renting on YouTube, you want to also be on Prime and maybe something like Fandango at Home. Fandango at Home is particularly cool because that's kind of a gray area. Some films are still in the theater when they're on Fandango at Home. So that one was super cool to get on. So anyway, I hope this information's useful. And long live independent film, and you should make your own film. You can do it.